So, um, if you think back to the fall of 2008,
Oh man, yeah, 2008.
right, the S&P 500 effectively just went into free fall,
Yep.
and it eventually wiped out, I mean, literally trillions of dollars in global wealth. Wall Street institutions that had stood for a century just evaporated in a matter of days.
It was surreal to watch. Just
Yeah.
absolutely surreal.
But the thing that always sticks with me is that the investors who suffered the absolute worst, the most catastrophic, permanent, unrecoverable losses during that period, they weren't necessarily the ones with the worst asset allocation.
No, not at all.
And they certainly weren't the ones with the worst math skills. They were the ones who panicked.
Exactly. They were the people whose psychology basically broke long before their portfolios actually did.
Yes, they liquidated their life savings at the absolute bottom of the market, locking in these devastating losses, simply to relieve the excruciating psychological pressure of watching the numbers drop.
The irony of modern finance, right? I mean, we have built the most sophisticated, data-rich, algorithmically optimized wealth-building machine in human history.
Right.
Yet the primary point of failure remains exactly identical to what it was 1,000 years ago.
The human mind.
The human mind. We can optimize a portfolio to the fourth decimal point, but we cannot mathematically engineer away the terror of losing our life savings.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have a profoundly important mission ahead of us today, taking a really concentrated look at a single, incredibly potent concept provided by you, the listener.
And it's a fascinating one.
It really is. We're examining an excerpt today, and well, really it's just the title of a workwear, but it functions almost like a linguistic Trojan horse.
I love that description.
The title is The Stoic Investor, Mastering Emotion in Retirement Planning.
It is a remarkable conceptual collision, honestly.
It really is.
Because on one side, you have this Hellenistic philosophy forged in the chaotic, violent world of antiquity, designed specifically to help individuals maintain their sanity when the world around them is completely outside their control.
Right, like ancient Rome or Greece.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have modern portfolio theory, a sequence of returns, risk, and just the sheer existential anxiety of funding a 30-year retirement.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because if you take a magnifying glass to that first phrase, the Stoic investor, you immediately run into what looks like a glaring contradiction.
You really do.
Because the core doctrine of Stoicism, coming from thinkers like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius, is the dichotomy of control.
The absolute unwavering division between the internal world, which you have total sovereignty over, and the external world, which you must accept with profound indifference.
Right. The Stoic framework basically insists that assigning your sense of well-being to external events is just a total recipe for misery.
Oh, 100%. If you base your happiness on the weather or, I don't know, the opinions of others.
Or the stability of the Roman Empire.
Right, exactly. If you do that, you are basically holding yourself hostage to variables you cannot influence.
But, and this is the rub, the very act of investing requires you to inextricably link your personal fortunes, your literal future security, to the most volatile, unpredictable external variables on the planet.
You're exposing your life's labor to global supply chain disruptions, central bank policy shifts.
Geopolitical conflicts.
All of it. You are staking your survival on the external world.
Which brings me to this thought. Is being a Stoic investor like being the captain of a ship in a hurricane who refuses to negotiate with the 50-foot waves and instead just locks their eyes completely on the compass?
Well, the captain knows the 50-foot waves are there. I mean, acknowledging reality is a prerequisite for survival.
Okay, fair.
But the captain does not waste cognitive bandwidth raging at the wind or, despairing over the barometric pressure. The captain's locus of control shrinks entirely to the helm.
Wow, okay. So in the context of modern finance, the waves are the macroeconomic environment.
Exactly. And the compass is your asset allocation, your savings rate, your chosen time horizon.
That makes a lot of sense.
The Stoic investor doesn't pretend the market isn't crashing. They simply recognize that the crash is an external event, while their decision to either hold their positions or panic sell, that is an internal choice.
I see the mechanical application there, I really do. But we have to push back on the underlying psychology here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because investing isn't just about survival. It's fundamentally driven by the desire for growth. You allocate capital because you want more capital.
True.
You want a higher standard of living, you want security, you want wealth. And the ancient Stoics warned extensively against the pursuit of wealth because desire itself creates vulnerability.
Right, the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah. So doesn't the very existence of a portfolio imply a deeply non-Stoic desire for a specific external outcome?
What's fascinating here is how the later Stoics, particularly Seneca, reconciled this exact tension.
Oh, right. Seneca was incredibly wealthy, wasn't he?
He was one of the wealthiest men in the Roman Empire, and he developed this concept of the preferred indifferent.
Preferred indifferent.
Yeah. The philosophy does not demand asceticism. It does not require you to take a vow of poverty or pretend that compound interest isn't this miraculous tool for human flourishing.
So you can want the money without letting the money define your emotional baseline.
Precisely. You prefer wealth to poverty because wealth provides utility, comfort, options. It is a completely rational preference.
But it's an indifferent.
Right. It remains an indifferent in terms of your core moral character and your ultimate inner peace.
Okay, I think I'm tracking.
So, if you achieve your target retirement number, excellent. If a black swan event wipes out half your portfolio, you are still essentially yourself.
The Stoic investor desires the growth of their portfolio, but they do not tie their psychological stability to its daily valuation.
They untether their self-worth from their net worth.
Man, which is an incredibly difficult severing to achieve when you consider the modern financial apparatus.
Well, it's nearly impossible for most people.
Because we live in an environment engineered to merge your self-worth with your net worth. Just think about the infrastructure of modern investing.
And real-time brokerage apps in our pockets.
Exactly. The push notifications alerting us to a 1% drop in an index.
The 24-hour financial news networks that treat every minor market fluctuation like a breaking geopolitical crisis.
It's all designed to trigger a reaction. The entire system.
It is an environment optimized for continuous behavioral disruption. The financial media business model relies on engagement, and the most reliable driver of human engagement is anxiety.
Wow. Yeah, if you are constantly monitoring the external noise, you are systematically eroding your internal locus of control.
Which is why the Stoic investor has to actively build barriers against that infrastructure. They have to essentially engineer their environment to support their philosophy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Look at the specific phrasing of the subtitle here. Mastering emotion.
Yeah, that phrasing is very deliberate.
It deliberately avoids words like eliminating or suppressing or ignoring. It concedes right out of the gate that you're going to feel these things.
You're human. The emotion is inevitable. It's the biological tax of participating in the market.
But why is emotion singled out as the primary thing to master? Like, the title doesn't say mastering the stock market or mastering interest rates.
Right.
It turns the focus entirely inward. Does this imply that the biggest threat to an investor isn't the economy, but the investor's own brain?
It absolutely implies that. By framing emotion as the subject of mastery, the text puts the power entirely back in your hands.
You cannot control the market, but you can master your reaction to it.
Yes. And the word mastering implies a hierarchical relationship with your own neurochemistry. We have to look at the evolutionary mismatch at play here.
Evolutionary mismatch.
Yeah, so when you see your portfolio drop by 20%, your brain does not process that as some abstract mathematical recalculation of future purchasing power.
Right. It doesn't think in spreadsheets.
No, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, processes that financial loss as a direct existential threat to your survival.
Because for hundreds of thousands of years, a sudden loss of resources meant you were literally going to freeze or starve.
The neurochemical cascade is identical. Cortisol floods your system, your heart rate elevates, and your prefrontal cortex, the logical long-term planning center of your brain, is essentially bypassed.
It just shuts down.
Basically, your biology is screaming at you to run to escape the threat. And in the modern financial context, that translates to hitting the sell button. Suppressing that reaction is neurologically impossible.
So mastery isn't about sitting in a lotus position and magically not feeling the cortisol spike.
Not at all.
Mastery is the conscious intervention after the spike. It's feeling the sheer terror of a market freefall, feeling your hand shaking over the keyboard, but fundamentally refusing to let that biological terror grab the steering wheel.
Exactly. And behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky mapped this out beautifully with prospect theory.
Oh, loss aversion, right.
Yes, specifically loss aversion. They demonstrated that the psychological pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the joy of gaining $100.
That's wild. We are just asymmetrical in our emotional responses to the market.
The gravity of a loss pulls twice as hard.
Which means during a bear market, the emotional drag on an investor is exponentially heavier than the euphoria of a bull market.
And the Stoic investor anticipates this asymmetry. They expect the pain. In Stoicism, there is a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils.
Premeditation of evils. I like
It
that.
involves deliberately visualizing worst-case scenarios so that when they inevitably occur, you are not caught off guard.
You stress test your own psychology before the market stress tests your portfolio.
Exactly.
Like, if you know historical data shows the market will experience a massive drawdown eventually, you mentally rehearse what that will feel like.
You look at your current balance and actually calculate, what does a 40% drop look like in real dollars?
Right. How will I react when I see that number? By rehearsing the disaster, you strip away its shock value. You build a circuit breaker.
And that circuit breaker is the absolute essence of emotional mastery. You insert a wedge of conscious thought between the stimulus and the response.
The stimulus is the market crash. The evolutionary response is panic selling.
And the wedge is your pre-planned, rational framework.
But, we always focus on the fear side of the equation. Greed is just as insidious, isn't it?
Oh, greed is arguably much harder to master.
Right, because society rewards and encourages it. Think about the massive speculative bubbles, the dot-com boom, the wild crypto run-ups.
Yeah.
The fear of missing out, FOMO, is an incredibly potent emotional cocktail.
Because greed functions on a dopamine loop. When you watch a speculative asset skyrocket, and you see neighbors or colleagues suddenly achieving massive unearned wealth,
Which always happens during a bubble.
always, your brain interprets that as a missed survival opportunity. Greed whispers that the fundamental rules of valuation no longer apply, that a new paradigm has arrived,
It convinces you that you are the exception to history.
which leads to catastrophic behavioral errors. Investors abandon their diversified index funds to chase the hot sector, often buying in at the absolute peak just before the bubble bursts.
It's just devastating.
It is. Mastering the emotion of greed requires the profound humility to accept that you cannot time the market, and it requires the discipline to stick to a boring, actuarially sound strategy while everyone around you appears to be getting rich quickly.
It's the discipline to remain at the dock when a ship of fools is setting sail, even if they're throwing a really great party on the deck.
That's a great way to put it.
So how do we actually codify this mastery? Because willpower alone is notoriously unreliable. You can't just wake up every morning and white-knuckle your way through 50 years of market volatility.
No, you can't. You codify it through structural commitment devices. In behavioral finance, this is often referred to as a Ulysses Pact.
Like Ulysses and the Sirens?
Exactly. Just as Ulysses had his crew tie him to the mast so he could hear the Simon's song without steering his ship into the rocks.
The Stoic investor builds rules that prevent their future panicked self from making destructive decisions.
Writing an investment policy statement is the ultimate Ulysses Pact. You sit down during a period of calm, rational clarity, and you write out exactly what your asset allocation is.
Exactly how often you will rebalance.
And exactly what you will do, and more importantly, what you will not do during a market crash.
You automate your contributions.
Yeah.
You automate your rebalancing. You actively remove yourself from the decision-making loop as much as possible.
Because if you don't have to consciously decide to invest every month, you don't give fear or greed the opportunity to intercept the transaction.
This level of psychological management is exhausting, honestly, which brings us to the ultimate proving ground. The text doesn't say mastering emotion in day trading or mastering emotion in venture capital.
No, it specifically targets retirement planning.
The arena where the time horizon stretches not across days or quarters, but across decades.
It's the ultimate test of the philosophy.
So what does this all mean? Retirement planning is fundamentally an exercise in temporal dislocation.
Temporal dislocation, I like that term.
You're trading present utility for future security. You earn capital today, and instead of deploying it to improve your immediate reality, buying a better car, taking a luxury vacation, upgrading your home, you lock it away.
You are essentially sending resources through a time machine.
Exactly, to a person you haven't met yet, your future self.
And that time horizon creates an extraordinary psychological hurdle known as the empathy gap.
Right. We see this clearly in those functional MRI studies conducted by researchers like Hal Hirschfield.
Those studies are fascinating.
When participants are asked to think about their present selves, certain regions of the brain light up. When asked to think about complete strangers, different regions activate.
But when asked to think about their future selves,
the brain activity closely mirrors the stranger pattern. We possess a profound neurological disconnect from the elderly version of ourselves. It's crazy.
You are being asked to sacrifice the very tangible desires of the present self for the abstract, distant needs of a stranger. That requires a monumental cognitive leap.
And the present self feels the pain of a market crash intimately and immediately.
The present self wants the relief of selling. The future self, who desperately needs the compound growth to survive, has no voice in the present moment.
So mastering emotion in retirement planning isn't just a defensive tactic against market volatility. It's an act of profound, disciplined empathy.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
The Stoic investor is acting as the fiduciary guardian for their future self. They are using their rational framework to override the present bias of their own neurochemistry.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire concept of compounding, which is the mathematical engine of retirement planning, relies on uninterrupted time.
Right, time in the market.
The math of compounding is completely indifferent to the narrative of the market. It doesn't care about geopolitical crises or inflation reports. It only requires capital and time.
But human beings are hypersensitive to narrative.
We are storytelling creatures. When the market drops, we construct a narrative of permanent catastrophe to explain it.
We really do.
Yeah.
And the Stoic framework allows you to sever the math from the narrative. You maintain the continuity of the compounding process by refusing to let the chaotic narrative of the present moment interrupt the timeline.
And the stakes of that interruption become exponentially higher as you approach the actual retirement date.
Oh, absolutely. The transition from the accumulation phase, where you are saving and buying assets, to the decumulation phase, where you have stopped working and are actively selling assets to survive, is arguably the most dangerous psychological shift in a person's life.
Because you are transitioning from a state of regular cash flow and dollar cost averaging to a state of finite resources and sequence of returns risk.
Sequence of returns risk is the absolute nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
If you retire and the market immediately enters a prolonged, severe bear market,
Which happens?
and you are forced to sell off chunks of your portfolio at depressed prices just to buy groceries, the mathematical damage can be completely irreversible. You are shrinking your share count at the exact bottom.
The anxiety associated with that vulnerability is paralyzing, and this is where the application of Stoic principles is truly tested against raw survival instinct.
Right, because if an investor is relying on a safe withdrawal rate, say the classic 4% rule derived from the Trinity study, they are trusting a historical model against the terrifying reality of their shrinking present balance.
Imagine the fortitude required for that. The market is down 30%, inflation is elevated, the financial news is predicting a decade of stagnation.
And you have to deliberately log into your brokerage account, sell assets at a massive loss, transfer the cash to your checking account, and go buy groceries.
All while trusting that the math will hold over a 30-year horizon. That is not a spreadsheet problem. That is a crucible of human endurance.
It requires the absolute internalization of the dichotomy of control. You cannot control the sequence of returns. You cannot control the macroeconomic environment you retire into.
No, you can only control your withdrawal rate, your spending behavior, and your refusal to capitulate to panic.
The Stoic investor in decumulation accepts the market conditions with radical reality. They adjust their controllable inputs, perhaps lowering their withdrawal rate temporarily or reducing discretionary spending without falling into despair over the uncontrollable variables.
It's an ongoing daily renegotiation with uncertainty. The spreadsheet assumes a smooth, average annualized return of 8%. But reality delivers years of negative 20%, followed by years of positive 30%.
The Stoic investor lives in the jagged volatility of reality, not the smooth line of the spreadsheet.
And this brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the source text. The Stoic investor, mastering emotion in retirement planning. It is not three separate ideas, it is an indivisible triad.
The identity, the mechanism, and the objective.
Yes, you adopt the identity of the Stoic, which redefines your relationship to external volatility. You utilize the mechanism of emotional mastery, building structural and psychological circuit breakers against your own biology.
And you apply this framework to the ultimate objective,
Yeah.
the multi-decade marathon of securing your future survival.
It's a complete paradigm shift from how the financial industry usually educates us. The industry sells complexity. They sell predictive models, proprietary algorithms, and complex derivative strategies.
They want you to believe that financial security is a product of having better data or better math than the person next to you.
Because you can charge a management fee for complex math. You cannot charge a management fee for Stoic endurance.
Exactly. The most mathematically optimal retirement plan, designed by Nobel laureates and run on supercomputers, is completely worthless if the human being executing the plan panics in year 7 and abandons the strategy?
The math is necessary, obviously. You need a sound asset allocation, but the math is subordinate to the psychology.
The history of the markets is basically a graveyard of brilliant people who lacked emotional control.
Just look at long-term capital management in the late 90s. It was run by literal Nobel Prize-winning economists who possessed the best mathematical models on Earth.
And they completely blew up.
They did, because they couldn't account for the irrational behavior of the market and their own overconfidence.
We've traversed an incredible amount of territory today from just 8 words. We've gone from the Stoics of ancient Athens to the fMRI machines mapping the empathy gap, all the way to the brutal realities of sequence of returns risk.
The density of the insight provided by the listener is really a testament to how foundational these concepts are. The mechanics of money are simple. The mechanics of the mind interacting with money are endlessly complex.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'll leave you with a final thought to mull over, a lens through which to view your entire financial life moving forward. We spend so much of our time and energy trying to optimize our portfolios, chasing an extra 0.5% of yield, debating the merits of international versus domestic stocks, or trying to time the next market correction.
We really do obsess over it.
But consider this. If mastering emotion is truly the indispensable linchpin of long-term survival, then is achieving financial independence ultimately more of a psychological achievement than a mathematical one?
That is a profound question. It forces a reevaluation of where we allocate our self-improvement efforts. The greatest compounding return you will ever experience may not come from selecting the perfect index fund, but from ruthlessly investing in the architecture of your own mental framework.
Because when the 50-foot waves inevitably come crashing down, it won't be the blueprint of the ship that saves you. It will be the captain's mastery over the helm. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.